that phrase came to mind, the prophetic city at the mouth of the Ka. And so I went back to the Kansas City Public Library and researched, and there was a history book that was written describing the early history of Greater Kansas City. And so it was a senator that had used that phrase, just predicting that Kansas City would be a major hub.
This is The Christian Author. With every episode, we hope to introduce you to relevant Christian authors and their works. It's a great way to supplement your daily Bible reading and study, as God uses the wisdom, experiences, and writing ability of these authors to enhance your life and others in your walk with Christ.
All right, Chris Michael on The Christian Author. Now, I would say that if you're from the Midwest, you might appreciate the book that's featured on this episode a little bit more because it's titled The Spiritual Roots of Kansas City. But I think you'll find it rather interesting no matter where you're listening. So here we go as we welcome the co-author of that book, Annika Bergen, to The Christian Author.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
All right, let's talk about the book because many people around Kansas City know you because you co-authored this book, The Spiritual Roots of Kansas City. How did you get involved in that project?
Bill High reached out to me on LinkedIn. He was CEO of NCF Heartland at the time, and so he needed help with the project on researching and interviewing and creating the book.
And a little bit about your co-author, Bill. What do we know about him?
Yeah, so Bill High, he's with 7 Generation Legacy now, and so he leads legacy workshops and consults with families wanting to grow their family legacy. And so he did it as just a way to serve Kansas City and share the legacy of Kansas City.
What prompted the writing of this book? Was it Bill who initially took the lead on that?
Yeah, it was Bill's vision. And so he had actually started with people researching for it back in 2012. And so I came on in 2015 and then spent 4 years helping to research it till it was published in 2019.
So you were involved in the research of it. They didn't just give you the material and you began writing.
Yeah, so lots and lots of time at the Kansas City Public Library and became a certified historian for the Missouri Valley Special Collections and lots of time interviewing people.
How did you know where to start?
So Bill High, he handed me about 30 pages of research that they'd already done, so that was helpful, and then a list of people, of leaders around the community for creating, because it's one thing to research history, but another thing to create modern history from like the 90s, early 2000s, so we were starting from scratch for that part.
I know if I write, I don't really like to do the research part. I just like to write. So
right.
Where are you on that? Or was the research something new for you, or had you done things like that before?
Well, it's fun because I'd studied writing, but I was not a historian by any means. But it was really fun to dive into the history of it and then to be able to filter through the stories and be able to share the ones that impacted me the most in the book.
So we're talking to Annika Bergen. We're talking about the book, which is called The Spiritual Roots of Kansas City. And the title goes on. It says, Discovering the Past to Shape Our Future. Is this God's story in Kansas City? Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so as I researched, I thought that Christian history would be peripheral. There'd be the main history, and then on the side, Christians would be doing things. But what I discovered is that Christians founded our city, and Christians shaped our city. And so my vision for the book as I worked on it became for people to discover what Christians had done in the past in order to have vision for how God wants to use them in the future and will use Christianity in the future.
It's kind of interesting that you co-authored the book. How did you collaborate with Bill as far as what was written?
A lot of him was the ideas and the vision for it and the direction for it, and then I'd be like the boots on the ground research and then writing it, and then we go back and forth in the editing process.
All right, so there were many Kansas cities many years ago referred to this as the prophetic city. Where did that come from? What does all that mean?
Yeah, that was really interesting. That was a phrase that I had glossed over the first time in my research and then was praying at the very end of the publishing process, Lord, is there anything that I forgot to include? And then right away, that phrase came to mind, the prophetic city at the mouth of the Ka. And so I went back to the Kansas City Public Library and researched, and there was a history book that was written describing the early history of Greater Kansas City. And so it was a senator that had used that phrase, just predicting that Kansas City would be a major hub. And so then when it came true, it was, the prophetic city at the mouth of the Ka. But for Christians, that also has a double meaning of the Lord and how he's guided the city.
So how is this book formatted to show the spiritual roots? Is it chronological? Is it by story? How did you do that?
It's both chronological and topical because history it kind of happens on top of itself. There are lots of streams of themes going on. And so I sorted it into like the early years, building the city, Civil War movement, recovery. But then there is a little bit of overlap from chapter to chapter. So the chapters are themed and then loosely on chronological order.
You kind of mentioned a few moments ago, you said something to the effect that, Lord, what do you want me to write? How did you what was your prayer life like before you began all this and as you asked God what you wanted to write?
Yeah, my vision for my writing has always just been to be God's storyteller, and because God is doing incredible things all the time, but people don't know unless someone tells a story. And so just my prayer in general for writing has always been, Lord, use me to tell your stories.
A gift built the first church in Kansas City. What's the story behind that, of that gift?
Yeah, so that's the Choteau family, Bernice and Francois Choteau. So they came to Missouri before there was the state of Missouri or Kansas. It was just the Missouri River met the Kansas River, the Kaw River. And so they settled a fur trading post here, and then French fur traders settled in the area and traded with the Native Americans that were here. And so as more and more people came, the Choteau family was Catholic, and they wanted a parish for people to meet at, and it was just rugged, wild pioneer days. And so the Choteau family, was wealthy from their fur trading company, and so they used their wealth to establish the first church in Kansas City.
Choteau. Now, everybody's familiar with that name here in Kansas City.
Right.
Is that the way it's always pronounced? Because I know sometimes the pronunciation of names may change over the years.
Yes.
But
I'm not a French linguist by any means, but that's the only way I've heard it pronounced.
Okay, Choteau. And when people probably see that when they come to Kansas City, they're thinking, how do you pronounce that?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Well, if you're wondering, it is Choteau. It is Choteau. How about this? A mob boss ruled the city, but the efforts of a rabbi helped topple the mob. Tell that story a little bit.
Yeah, so that was Rabbi Samuel Meyerberg. So before that, from the late 1800s into the early 1900s, there was first Jim Pendergast was in power with the mob, and then his brother Tom Pendergast. And so there's a lot of crime and corruption and fraudulent voting and police who were criminals being in charge of the city and enabling crime to continue. And so Rabbi Samuel Meyerberg was actually the first person to speak out publicly against the mob. And so then the mob targeted him, and he had to install bulletproof glass in his car, and he slept with a gun under his pillow, and he was shot at while in his car, but the bulletproof windows saved his life. And then later he had to evacuate Kansas City. But eventually his efforts led grassroots efforts that eventually toppled the mob.
Wow. The spiritual roots of Kansas City, that's what we're talking about, the book with Annika Bergen. And this is more than just a book to read. From what I understand, each chapter comes with some discussion questions and things like that. So how can people utilize the book beyond just reading it?
Yes, I wrote the book with a vision in mind for church small groups to be able to use it, or for pastors to use it for their material, or school groups. And so each chapter correlates with, at the end of the book, there's a section of both scripture topics that are related to the topic in the chapter, and then reflection questions. And so that Bible studies can use it to say, okay, we can look at what happened in the past, and then let's see what does God say about that, and then what can we learn from it through scripture to guide us going forward.
Now, typically, I say typically, in a lot of cases, hospitals and things like that were things that were established by Christians. Was that the case in Kansas City as well?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and schools and orphanages, and a lot of that was from the Catholic Church. But yeah, they were the first. The Christians were the first to establish this.
Yeah, there's always roots that seem to trace to that, so that's always very interesting. Was there a certain denomination? You said Catholics. Was there a certain denomination that was prominent here in Kansas City?
Yeah, Catholics were the first, quickly followed by Baptists and Methodists with if you've heard of Johnson County, that was Reverend Thomas Johnson that started the mission to the Shawnee tribe here. So that is where we get Shawnee Mission. And so it's phrases we hear all the time that we don't always realize the Christian roots from them. And then the Baptist denomination with Reverend Isaac McCoy, and then his son John Calvin McCoy founded Westport.
See, all this is very interesting. You see the names, and then now you can really relate to them if you read the book. Do we know of some other preachers, some evangelists, some prominent families that are important to the spiritual roots of Kansas City that you can talk about?
Yeah, one fun one was D.L. Moody. He's a famous evangelist from Chicago, and he preached his last revival sermons here in Kansas City. And so it was really fun to go back and read what he said about Kansas City in 1900 or 1899 about the ways that Kansas Cityans came together and just how special the unity was in our city from what he saw.
So how can we see our destiny for Kansas City by finding out our spiritual roots? It's kind of the way the book goes, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's kind of like if you have a family, you're always passing on the family stories of, our family's German or Italian or came here from Africa, and it's just a way to form your identity. And so the same is true with cities, that we have an identity, and just knowing who we are then shapes how we live for the future.
Let's talk about your time a little bit with Signatory. Was that something that led to what you're doing right now as far as writing?
Yeah, it did. So the Signatory, I worked as director of communications there, and so then that led on to other projects and just meeting a lot of great people that needed help with their writing, and so then they asked me to come on. And now I specialize in helping people write books, but it was started from co-authoring The Spiritual Roots of Kansas City.
So how is helping someone write something different from just writing something on your own? Because that, I would seem that it's a little different approach, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of times whenever I'll partner with someone to help them put their book out, it's really focusing on what's their voice, what's their way of talking, what's their life stories. And so my goal as a writer coming alongside someone else is to help them get their story out and match their voice and match their style of communication.
Yeah, I would think that would be a little more difficult. But so what kind of writing do you like to do just on your own? Do you like to research stuff and do nonfiction, or you like to write fiction? What is it?
Yeah, I'm working on a historical fiction novel right now, and then I also love doing just poetry for fun.
Now, a lot of people have entertained the idea of writing a book. And a lot of Christian people seem to gravitate towards that. I happen to be one of those. And I read an article that you have on your website about listing 3 qualities that publishers look for in selecting a book. The essential 3, I think, is what you called it. Talk about those just a bit for people out there who may be considering writing a book.
Yeah, so those 3 came from an editor I met at a launch party in New York, and so his job was acquisitions editor.
Are you talking about the no guy?
Yes.
Okay.
I met an acquisitions editor. I didn't know what he did, and he said, my job is to say no. I say no to people all day for just how many people want to publish books versus how many books just on a practical level can be published. And so, yeah, the 3 things that he told me they looked for was the quality of writing, the novelty of the idea, and then the platform of ready listeners and readers who'd be ready to buy the book.
Are you then in a position right now to try to get people to get a yes as you help them? Is that what your goal is, really?
That's my goal. But then also along the years, I've seen that there's a lot of value in self-publishing. So like the Spiritual Roots of Kansas City was self-published through the Signatory. And so I think traditional publishers financially need a bigger platform to sell more books. But there's a lot of people with a powerful message. And so I've come alongside as editor-in-chief for Streamline Books, which self-publishes books. And so we just see the value in so many authors that have a message to share, but not necessarily the platform to attract bigger audiences. But there is so much value in self-publishing their books still.
What is your encouragement for those potential writers out there, whether it be a full book, maybe devotionals, whatever? Really, what's a few words of encouragement for them?
My word of encouragement would be to trust that the Lord can use your book, no matter how small our giftings feel to us. God is never limited by them. And so just the biggest thing is being faithful in the message God's given you to preach that message through teaching, writing, whatever means God gives you to be able to just be faithful with his message.
I know a lot of people, they write and they think, there it is. But to me, and I think you do some of this as well, editing is so important because communicating your message, sometimes it just needs to be edited down to be able to communicate better.
Yes.
How do you help people with their editing?
Yes. So my mentor in college, she would tell me the world will listen to anything you have to say as long as you can say it well. And so that's just always stuck with me for it does matter the quality of what we produce. And so I've been blessed to have a degree in writing and to be able to have studied writing for years. And so I think that there is so much value in honing your message to make sure that it communicates what you want it to communicate.
Yeah, and it really bothers me in our American society today how the English language is kind of abused anymore. And I don't know if you have an opinion on that, but whether it be through texting or emails or whatever, and I'm not just blaming it on the younger generation because us older people now, and I'm not calling you one of those older people, I'm calling me that, we're starting to kind of abuse the language and punctuation and things like that. Is that something you're in agreement on?
Well, that's funny. So I am a millennial, so I have grown up around social media. But I will say there's a Longfellow has a quote. He's a poet, and he has this line that says, "Art is long and time is fleeting." And just that how a piece of art will last even as time passes by and as we pass away. And so there's the difference between social media. It's fast, it's quick. People look at it for 30 seconds at best, and then they move on. Whereas I love the value of a book. If someone buys it, it sits on their shelf for years, and they can return to it, or they can pass it on to a friend. And a book is a commitment to sit with someone for hours and really listen deeply to what they have to say, which is becoming a lost art. And so that's why I love that books keep that in our society.
Exactly. So the book is called The Spiritual Roots of Kansas City, Discovering the Past to Shape Our Future. Where can you find that?
It is, yes. It's on Amazon online or Barnes & Noble or any book retailer.
Annika Bergen, no doubt well-spoken and a wonderful author as we feature the book, The Spiritual Roots of Kansas City. Chris Michael, thanks for listening to this episode of The Christian Author.
The content of the program is merely for informational purposes and is not an endorsement of the author or their work.